we have a crisis in the world, tremendous crisis, and also crisis in our consciousness, in us. I see the urgency of change, radical revolution, mutation in the mind. I see it. It is necessary. There is complete quietness of the mind, and that which is silent has vast space. Only then that which is nameless comes into being.
This is Urgency of Change, the Krishnamurti podcast. The crisis is not in economics, politics, or religion. The crisis is in our consciousness. Hello and welcome to episode 131 of Urgency of Change. Season 3 of the Krishnamurti podcast continues with the format of carefully chosen extracts from the philosopher's talks. Each weekly episode focuses on a theme explored by Krishnamurti, and the aim is to represent his different approaches to these universal topics. This week's theme is crisis. Upcoming themes are light, struggle, and nothingness. This is a podcast from Krishnamurti Foundation Trust. Please visit our official YouTube channels for hundreds of advert-free video and audio recordings of Krishnamurti's talks and clips. You can also find our daily quotes and videos on Instagram and Facebook at Krishnamurti Foundation Trust. If you enjoy the podcast, please leave a review wherever you listen to podcasts, which helps its visibility. This week's episode on crisis has 4 sections. The first extract is from Krishnamurti's second talk in Ojai, 1985, titled, "Where is the Crisis?"
It's a nice, not too hot a morning, pleasant under the trees, and a rather cool breeze which one hopes you will not mind. And it is rather convenient to go to sleep here. You're well covered with blankets and all the rest of it. Nice Sunday morning, free of all the office work and labor and travail and skill. And under the trees and the dappled light, it's rather pleasant. You can go on talking, but it doesn't matter. So now I'll go to sleep and you go on. If that is what you want, go to sleep. But if we are serious, earnest, which we must be, because this is one of the crises we have come to. It's no longer mere entertainment, no longer mere intellectual game, or seeking sensation from one thing to another, or from another. We've got to face some extraordinary crisis in life. Life being our consciousness. The crisis is not in economics, political, religious, but the crisis is in our consciousness. Why we are what we are of thousands and thousands of years. That's where the crisis is. And merely to solve the economic crisis or the political crisis or the brutality of ideologies and wars. It's not only there, but much deeper. So we're going to inquire first, because they're all related. All problems are related to each other. They're not separate. If one can solve one problem completely, then you have solved all other problems. Because there is no separate problem. Whether it be sexual, whether it be the desire to fulfill, and so on. So, in the resolution of one, you solve the whole thing, if you know how to do it.
The second extract is from the fourth talk in Ojai 1981, titled "The Crisis Must Be Answered."
We've been saying that the world is in a crisis, threatened by war, overpopulation, poverty, terrible division between nationalities, and all the absurdities that are going on in the name of religion. But the crisis, as we said, is in the human consciousness, in the mind, in the brain, in the heart, which cannot possibly be solved by politicians or by the accumulated knowledge of the scientists. Nor is it an economic problem, but it's become dangerously human problem. And apparently, very few are inclined or interested to concern themselves with that crisis in the human mind. And if you are at all serious, and I hope we are, we must be concerned with the responsibility of all that is taking place in the world. Because as we explained quite often, that our consciousness is not the particular consciousness of one person. It's the consciousness of all mankind. Because all human beings suffer wherever they live. They are in conflict, misery, confusion, searching out leaders who are always betraying them, depending on priests who give them a lot of words and meaningless answers. Nor can one depend on the scientists who, with their specialization, are helping to destroy the world. And as this crisis is in ourselves and nowhere else, and so the responsibility, as we pointed out, becomes very great and very serious. And whether this consciousness with which we have lived for a million years can never be transformed. As there are some who say it cannot. Human nature is what it is. Modify it, accept it, slightly change it. But fundamentally, it cannot possibly be changed. And if one accepts what the philosophers and those who think in that manner, then man, human being, must suffer endlessly, must remain in conflict everlastingly. There must be wars endlessly, as there have been for the last 5,000 years in history, recorded history. Actually, a war somewhere on this earth, which is our earth, where we are meant to live, not American earth or the English earth or the Indian or the Japanese and so on. And whether that consciousness in which there is this crisis must be answered, not by any particular specialist, professionals, but by us, ordinary, everyday, living human beings with their jobs, with their miseries, confusion. One must have patience to listen to ourselves, because now we are depending on all the specialists, the professors, those who tell you what to do. We have lost self-reliance. We have become more or less slaves to authority, whether it's scientific authority, religious, or economic, or environmental authority. We are losing all over the world our sense of integrity. We are depending on books. Books have their place, but to understand ourselves through books, through another, has led us to this confusion, to this crisis. And as we pointed out over and over again, that we are thinking, reasoning, observing together. We are not accepting what the speaker is saying or rejecting. Is merely acting as a mirror in which we see ourselves. And when we begin to see ourselves as we are, then we can throw away, break up the mirror. The mirror has no value. So, we are saying that the crisis is in our minds and our hearts. And we don't seem to be able to understand that crisis. Understanding brings its own discipline. Not the discipline of conformity, not the discipline of imitation, not the discipline to accept something, however great or small. Discipline means to the root word of that word, discipline, comes from the word disciple. Disciple is one who learns, not from another, however wise, however enlightened, however knowledgeable, but learning from our own self-education, learning about ourselves, because there is our crisis. We have handed ourselves over to the priests, to the scholars, to the professors, to the philosophers, and to the analysts. And unfortunately, recently, handed ourselves over to some gurus from India or Asia, which is most unfortunate. They have become rich, exploiting people. It's become a great religion as it is now, has become a great business affair, which again is obvious. So, we are saying that one has to observe oneself, learn about oneself, not from anybody, because they are not themselves studying themselves. They have theories, some speculative ideas, which they have experimented on animals, pigeons, and so on, but they have never looked at themselves actually as they are, with their greed, with their ambition, with their competition, with their aggressiveness, violence, and so on. All that we are. And in the understanding of that, actually understanding, not merely the verbal description of what we are, but the actual understanding of our reactions, our thoughts, our anger, our wounds, our aggressiveness, violence, and so on, looking at it. Therefore, out of that understanding, observation, comes this discipline which is constantly learning anew. Perhaps in this country we have lost that meaning of that word discipline. We have relegated to the soldier, to some monks and so on. We are, in this country especially, we have lost the meaning of that word. If you are a careerist, in that career there is a certain demand for discipline. If you are a carpenter, the very understanding of the wood, the tools, the nature of design, that observation, that understanding brings its own learning, its own discipline, its own action. But apparently we have lost that, because we're all so terribly concerned to get on, to climb the ladder of success, to become something. If you observe all this, And so therefore we're becoming more and more and more superficial. You've got a marvelous country, one of the most beautiful countries in the world, from the high snow-capped mountains to the desert, to the vast rivers, and the deep valleys, and the great trees. It's a marvelous country. And we human beings are destroying all that because we want to get on. God knows where, but get on. Which means we are observing all this ourselves. Please, you are not following the speaker. The speaker is not your guru, your leader. You are not his followers. One has to wipe away all that and examine closely what we are doing as human beings. And in this consciousness, there is disorder. And we are trying to bring order in that by conformity, by acceptance, obedience. We have never understood what is order. And as the speaker has been in this country for the last 60 years, I've seen every kind of phase, fad, something always new. And we live practically, socially, morally, ethically in disorder. And without understanding order, in the deepest sense of that word, meditation becomes utterly meaningless. We think that through meditation we'll bring order. That's the trick that has been played upon us for a million years. But order begins at home, near. So we have to investigate together what is that order. Because our consciousness, as we said, is in total disarray. It's in conflict. It is battling itself against something which it has created. So we are together going to inquire what is order. We are using that word to imply a state of mind, not as an ideal, a state of mind, a state of heart, in which there is no conflict whatsoever. Conflict indicates disorder. Choice indicates disorder. A man who chooses is really not actually free. He's confused. Please don't accept what is being said. It's important, I think, one thing, that one must cultivate or have this sense of skepticism, especially in psychological matters. There must be doubt. And if you observe the Asiatic world, India and so on, doubt has been one of the precepts in religion. The Hindus and the Buddhists have talked a great deal about doubt. But in the Christian world, doubt is denied. Because that world is based on faith. And if you question, you're either excommunicated or tortured as they have done in the past, burnt. Now you're tolerated. There isn't much difference. So, please observe yourself, your environment, your society, and your own thoughts with considerable doubt. And also listen to the speaker with doubt, with question, demanding of yourself. You are doubting all that you have thought, observed, learned. So that the brain is free to observe. But also, doubt must be kept on a leash like a dog. If you keep a dog on the leash all the time, the poor animal withers. You must know when to let it go, run, chase, jump. Similarly, one must hold doubt on a leash. And also one must learn the subtlety when to let it go. So we are asking, saying, why is it that man has lived in this disorder for millions and millions of years? Why we human beings, wherever we are, why? What's the cause of this disorder?
The third extract is from Krishnamurti's first talk in Ojai, 1981, titled, "To Understand the Crisis, We Must Be Aware of Thought."
So, to understand the crisis in consciousness, in our very being, one must inquire very closely into the nature of thought. Because that's the only instrument we have. We may invent intuition, a hunch, and so on. But it's still the basis of thought. Thought is the basis of all this. I wonder if one wonders if one has recognizes this and sees what thought has done. Thought has created the world in which we live, the society in which we live. The society is an abstraction. Society is an abstraction. What is real is relationship between man and man. And the socialists, the communists, the Democrats, and so on, are trying to change society, the social structure all over the world. But they are never concerned with the relationship between man and man, man, woman, and so on. Because that relationship makes society, which is again a fact. If your relationship with another is correct, true, has integrity, your society will then be what is totally different. But that society, which is an abstraction, is being changed by machines, not by revolutions, by computers, by the atom bomb, by all the technological inventions that mad thought has brought about. That is changing society, the structure. But human beings remain as they are, selfish, self-centered, completely concerned with their own dignity, with their own vanity, with their own ambition, with their own fulfillment, with their own desires. So in order to understand and bring about a radical change in the crisis, or to respond to that crisis correctly, which means accurately, completely, one must inquire very deeply into the nature of thought. Why thought has become so extraordinarily important in life. And is there another instrument apart from thought? We're going to be very careful without any superstition, without any mystification, without any sense of acceptance, having faith and all that nonsense. We're going to together examine what thought is, how it has created this terrible mess and problems and so on. And we are going to inquire also together if thought is not the instrument of the resolution of this crisis, is there another? Please, as we pointed out, we are exploring together. You are not listening to what the speaker is saying, merely accepting or agreeing or then not, but joining together to find out. Because the speaker has no authority. He's not a guru, thank God. So there is no relationship which is so utterly false between the teacher and the taught. There is only the act of learning. Not you teach me and I teach you, which becomes ridiculous. But rather, that together, as two human beings, think together, which doesn't mean you agree with me or I agree with you, but together examine the nature of thought Because by thought we live, by thought we destroy each other. So thought has become astonishingly important in our life. Thought divides each one of us in our relationship, man and woman. I do not know if you have gone into it. How thought divides a relationship, and so there is everlasting battle in that relationship. We'll go into all that, perhaps not during this first talk, but there are going to be several 6 talks, we'll go into all this, if you are interested. The speaker is not persuading you. He's not stimulating you. He's not acting as a drug. But together we see this crisis. And we must resolve this crisis or respond to this crisis properly, directly, sanely, rationally, not according to our particular narrow belief or faith or some kind of idiotic concept. So we are asking, what is the nature of thought, and why thought has become so devastatingly important? You might say, if there is no thought, what, I am reduced to a vegetable. Thought has its function. It has. And also thought has brought about this terrible atom bomb that's going to destroy human beings, war. Thought has divided the world into nationalities. Thought has divided the Christian from the Muslim, from the Hindu. Having divided, it says we must love one another. Having divided, says there is only one Savior who alone is responsible for your sorrow and all the rest of it. Thought is responsible for all this. And if we really do not sensitively be aware of the movement of thought and all its activity, then we shall not be able to meet this crisis. And if we cannot, we're going to destroy each other. This is not a prophecy. You can see it on the wall, written on the wall. Unless we are totally blind, totally insensitive, so absorbed in our own petty little self. It's all there for anyone can see, to see what's going to happen and what must be done. So, let us together, and I mean together, not I'm going to, The speaker is going to tell you and you accept it. Then it becomes rather silly. But together find out why thought has become so supreme, and why thought, and what is the source of thought, what is the origin of thought, what's the beginning of thought. We've got 10 minutes more. Time is an extraordinary thing. To understand time, because time is also thought. So if we understand the nature of thought, we shall understand the nature of time. And if there is an ending to thought, that's real meditation. There is an ending to time, not physical time, but where time must have a stop. And we're going to discover that for ourselves in all these talks. That is, if you are care to listen, care to share, think over together, then we will discover it for ourselves and not be taught by another. If you are taught by another, you become a second-hand human being, which we are. We are what everybody has thought. From Aristotle, the Greeks, from the ancient Hindus, from the ancient Buddhists, and so on, all that is handed down, and we are all that. So we are utterly mediocre people. There's nothing original. Not in the field of technology. Of course there are inventions. And you identify with that invention and you think you are unique. But thought is common to all mankind. The black, brown, or whatever color, or nationality and so on. Thought is common. And therefore, there is a common bondage between all of us. And unless we understand the extraordinary subtlety of thought with its memory, we shall not be able to meet this crisis. So we'll go into it. Time will admit, because I have to stop exactly an hour. 5 minutes. We are inquiring into the origin of thought. It's in 5 minutes. But we can, and we'll proceed. If we cannot do it completely this morning, we'll do it tomorrow morning and other times. Thought is born of experience. Thought is born out of that experience which becomes knowledge, stored up in the brain as memory, various types of memories, technological, personal, national, historical, and so on, scientific. So, experience, listen, discover it for yourself as we talk. Experience, knowledge, from knowledge is memory, the remembering of past things. Then from memory, thought. Then from thought there is action. And that action brings further knowledge. So we are caught in this. That is thought, experience, which may be personal, global. Knowledge which is global. From knowledge which is stored up in the brain as memory. Memory and from that memory response which is thought. Then thought acts this way or that way, rightly, wrongly, skillfully, or with great subtlety. And from that, further knowledge. So, in this chain, human brain works. He's caught in this chain. This is a fact, if you observe it very closely. And that's why thought has become so extraordinarily important. And as it is born out of experience, knowledge, and as knowledge can never be complete, whole at any time, so thought is always limited, is always broken up, and whatever it touches must bring about division. Obvious, right? So do we see the truth of that? That knowledge can never be complete and thought then must be incomplete, limited, fragmentary, and whatever it does, whether it creates the United Nations or invents God, it must always be limited, and therefore, being incomplete, it must bring about disharmony, conflict. If one realizes this completely, not as a theory, an idea, but an actuality, then thought has its place. Because you cannot, if you have no knowledge of where you are going after this meeting, it will be absurd. So knowledge has a place. But knowledge, psychological knowledge, which is the me, which thought has put together, the self, and the self-centered activity, different from in the relationship with another, in that brings about conflict, confusion, misery. So, if one understands that very, very deeply, then one can begin to inquire, is there a totally different kind of instrument that is not fragmentary, that's whole?
The final extract in this episode is from the 5th talk in Bombay 1964, titled Facing a Crisis Inactively.
Most of us bring the past into the present. And the present becomes mechanical. You observe your own life and you'll see how extraordinarily mechanical it is. You function like a machine, like a rather poor imitation of an excellent electronic brain. And because you have allowed, accepted, you have got used to time. Now, there is a life out of time when you understand the past being memory and nothing else. The memory as knowledge, accumulation of experiences, the thing that man has gathered for millennia. That's the past, conscious or unconscious. The traditions, all that is there, and you come with that to the present, the now. And therefore you are not living at all. You are living with memories, with the dead ashes of yesterday. Do watch yourself. So then, out of that dead ashes of memory, you invent the tomorrow. I will be non-violent one day. I am violent today, but I will keep on polishing my lovely violence till I am one day free and be non-violent. Which is so infantile, juvenile. And you have accepted it. You don't spit on that idea under the people who talk about such nonsense. You treat them as great people because you're caught in time as they are caught in time. They're not liberating you. They're not making you face the fact of time, which is to bring the whole past into the present as a crisis. You know what happens when you're in crisis? Actual crisis, not an invented crisis. Not crisis with words and ideas, theories. When you're actually confronted with a crisis that demands your complete attention. Complete attention being your mind, your eyes, your ears, your heart, your nerves, the whole of your being. You know what happens? Then there is no past. Then there's nobody to tell you what to do. Then out of that tremendous attention comes spontaneity. Then in that state there is no time. But the moment you begin to think about the crisis, quotes. Moment you begin to think, all the past comes into reaction. Our thought is the reaction of the past, of association and all the rest of it. And then you have the beginning of time and sorrow. Therefore, a mind which is not in a state of action, but in a state of inaction, from which comes further inaction, which is of time. There are two kinds of inaction. The inaction that time breeds, and the inaction which is total state of mind when they are confronted with a tremendous crisis. Out of that, facing a tremendous crisis, the mind is so completely inactive, which is free from all thought. And out of that inaction there is action. That's the only action that counts, not the other. So, if one understands the nature of time and the meaning of time, understand, I mean, really has lived with it. One has lived with it, gone into it, not accepted any theory, any verbal explanation, and not escaping through the past, actually goes into this phenomena of psychological time. As you go into it, you bring time into crisis. Then that crisis makes you completely attentive. And therefore, the mind is in a state of action. It is always acting. Because the mind then is free from that state of the past and the future, which is time. And that state, when the mind is not concerned with the past or the future, the present has a totally different meaning. It is not a theory. It is not a state of despair. So, the ending of sorrow is the ending of thought. And the ending of thought is the beginning of wisdom. Sorrow, the ending of sorrow is wisdom.